Welcome back for another deep dive. This time, we're heading back in time a bit. Before, the Oval Office even, we're going to be exploring Barack Obama's political journey. And we're going to do that through his book, The Audacity of Hope. And I think one of the most interesting things about this book is he wrote it before he became president. So it gives us a really unique window into kind of his evolving political philosophy at that time.
Yeah, it's really like a time capsule, right, of his thoughts on politics and policy. You know, even the very challenges that were facing America at the time that, of course, he'd later grapple with as president.
Right, like we're seeing behind the curtain.
Yeah.
Well, get ready, because we're about to unearth some pretty surprising insights. Okay, so Obama starts off by discussing his early days working in Chicago neighborhoods. And he encountered a lot of cynicism toward politics. People felt let down by broken promises. They questioned the whole point of public service.
And you can really feel his struggle, to reconcile that cynicism that he's hearing with his own belief in a different kind of politics. He would find himself sort of explaining this vision of politics that was, grounded in shared values and the common good.
It's like he's trying to bridge that gap between this jaded reality and the ideal, the hope. But here's where it gets really interesting, I think. Obama admits to his own disillusionment. After years in Illinois politics, he even compares it to like an athlete or an actor, realizing their dream might not actually happen.
Yeah, and he's pretty honest about the toll it took, on him personally. The long drives, missing family time, even Michelle's growing frustration with how much he was pouring into his work.
Makes him very human, right?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, we all go through that work-life balance struggle.
Even presidents, or future presidents,
Yeah.
Okay, so then the story shifts to his Senate race. And he talks about this stark contrast between his limited resources and this almost unbelievable good fortune. That helped him secure that win.
It's almost like he was surprised by it himself, right? Kind of acknowledges the role of fate and circumstance in his success, which you don't hear from politicians a lot.
Yeah, it's very refreshing. And some of those circumstances lead to these hilarious anecdotes. Like, remember his aides' worries about how certain parts of Illinois would perceive Obama? Like, no Dijon mustard allowed.
Right, like all the cultural nuances that he had to navigate, yeah.
Exactly. But beyond those funny moments, Obama really emphasizes these extensive travels across Illinois, making a point to hold, these small gatherings, to genuinely listen to people's concerns and hopes, rather than just pushing his own agenda.
And, that's where his belief in the constant cross-pollination of ideas and cultures in America really comes through, right? He's encountering this wide spectrum of perspectives that's going to shape his approach to finding common ground.
Absolutely. And, these early experiences really planted the seeds for what he became known for later, that emphasis on unity and bridging divides. So then we get a glimpse into his arrival in Washington, D.C. as a freshman senator. And he has this great line where he says he felt like a rookie who shows up after the game, something a lot of us can relate to.
Right. Going into a new environment where everybody seems to know exactly what's going on.
You feel so lost, exactly.
And he talks about that warm welcome, from his Democratic colleagues. But they also warn him about the harsh realities of partisan politics. There's this striking anecdote, actually, where he recounts a conversation with a seasoned Senate staffer. And this staffer believes the growing partisan divide is because, he attributed it to a lack of shared experiences, like World War II, which fostered this sense of camaraderie and collaboration back in the day.
Makes you wonder, right? Have we lost that shared purpose?
Well, Obama seems to think so. He expresses real concern about the difficulty of finding common ground on these critical issues like education and healthcare. And he sees both sides really presenting what he calls these false or cramped choices, which just make the divide worse.
Yeah, instead of moving towards solutions.
Right, exactly.
So that frustration with the gridlock in Washington seems to be what drives him toward this desire for more honest and productive political discourse. And that leads us to his reflections on the Constitution and its relevance to modern debates, which was prompted, by the way, by a really interesting encounter with Senator Byrd.
Yes, Senator Byrd. He really urged Obama to understand America's founding documents, like to really grasp the Constitution as a living document that still speaks to the challenges of today.
And this leads him into a discussion about executive power, especially in the context of, the Bush administration's approach to national security, post 9/11. He mentions these controversial legal interpretations regarding torture and the Geneva Conventions, even brings up the contentious confirmation hearings for figures like Condoleezza Rice and Alberto Gonzales.
Yeah, and you can tell that he's concerned about the potential for abuse of power. And what he sees as an erosion of checks and balances, especially when it comes to the executive branch.
He seems to see a dangerous trend in the justification of actions that he believes go against the very principles of the Constitution.
Absolutely.
And speaking of procedures, he also takes aim at the use of the filibuster. He highlights what he sees as hypocrisy from both Democrats and Republicans who readily employ it to obstruct legislation they don't like.
It's not about the procedure itself, right?
Yeah.
But how it becomes this tool for avoiding the real debate about the impact and values at stake in policy decisions.
Right. It's a way to sidestep the hard conversations.
Exactly. He's calling for something more substantial,
And then we dive into the murky world of campaign finance.
where he really gets personal about the pressures politicians face.
Yeah, he shares this really eye-opening story about his Meiji consultant, breaking down the astronomical cost of running a statewide campaign, especially, the millions needed for TV ads.
Really lays bare the financial hurdles for candidates, right? And how that constant need to raise money can affect their decisions once they're in office.
And it completely contrasts with his earlier efforts to reform campaign finance in the Illinois legislature. So you see this tension between his ideals and the harsh reality of how campaigns actually work. He even talks about his own experience facing this wealthy opponent, Blair Hull, who outspent him, significantly during the Senate race.
You can really sense that internal struggle, between sticking to his principles and the pressure to play the money game.
It raises some big questions about the role of money in our democracy.
Right.
And intertwined with money is the influence of the media, which he takes a hard look at as well. He's really concerned about how the media shapes political discourse and how difficult it is to communicate nuanced ideas in a world obsessed with sound bites.
Especially how single, ill-considered remarks can get blown out of proportion, creating this atmosphere of fear and caution that prevents real engagement with the public.
Yeah, like everyone's walking on eggshells all the time, which just hinders open and honest dialogue. And that brings us to a topic that's incredibly relevant today: the impact of globalization on the American economy.
And he really digs into the complexities. He recognizes that gap that's widening between the people who benefit from globalization and those who are left behind.
He makes it real, too, with that story of the Maytag workers in Galesburg, Illinois. The plant closed down because of outsourcing.
Yeah, it's a powerful image, right, of the human cost of these economic policies.
Absolutely. And then it leads into this conversation I had with Robert Rubin, the former Treasury Secretary.
Yeah.
And they're discussing whether globalization will inevitably lead to a decline in U.S. living standards.
Right.
I really like that he's seeking out different perspectives. Like, he's really trying to understand this complicated issue.
Yeah, he doesn't shy away from the tough questions.
Not at all.
And Rubin doesn't give him easy answers either. He acknowledges that there could be both good and bad outcomes from, increased global competition. It's not just a simple win or lose thing.
Right. There are a lot of unknowns, and that really highlights the need for smart policies.
Yeah.
And that's where Obama introduces his idea for a new social compact. He was inspired by FDR's response to the Great Depression.
So he's thinking about things like education and job training, infrastructure investment, and a stronger safety net.
It's all about giving American workers the tools and support they need to thrive in this rapidly changing economy, while making sure those who are struggling have help.
It's proactive, right? It tries to deal with the bad parts of globalization while still taking advantage of the good parts.
Absolutely. So this brings us to another big part of Obama's philosophy: the idea of values and faith. In politics, he talks about his own journey, starting with his mother's skepticism toward organized religion and his own later embrace of faith.
Yeah, it's a personal story, and I think it helps us understand his worldview.
Right, and how he approaches ideas of morality in the public sphere. And it becomes even more relevant when he brings up his opponent, Alan Keyes.
Oh, yeah.
Who said that Christ would not vote for Barack Obama during their 2004 Senate race.
It's a controversial statement for sure.
Yeah, and it really sparked a lot of discussion about faith and politics. Obama believes faith can be a good thing for addressing social issues.
Of course.
But he emphasizes this need for empathy.
Right. Being able to understand and respect other people's beliefs.
Even if you don't agree with them.
Exactly. It's not about forcing your beliefs on other people.
But about finding common ground. And promoting understanding through respect and conversation. He even tells this story about a trip to a small town in southern Illinois and how the history of race relations there really impacted his interactions. It's a powerful example of how understanding history and practicing empathy are key for bridging those divides.
And that theme of empathy really runs throughout the book.
Yeah, it does.
It speaks to Obama's belief in the possibility of finding common ground, even when people have different beliefs and backgrounds and experiences.
Yeah, and then he starts to reflect on the personal costs of being in public service, especially how it affects family life. He talks about Michelle's dad's disability and her challenges as a working mom and how they've struggled to balance their careers with raising their daughters.
A very honest look at the sacrifices people make, right? Not just the individual in public service, but their families as well.
Yeah, he knows it takes a toll on him and Michelle. And he sees the compromises she's had to make.
And he also talks about his efforts to be there for his daughters.
Despite everything.
Even with all the demands of his career. Which shows, his commitment to family is still strong.
Right. It reminds us that politicians are people, too.
Yeah. With families and hopes and dreams outside of politics.
Exactly. And it leads to this really moving part at the end, where Obama finds hope again in the American story.
Yeah, he reaffirms his belief in the ability of regular people to make a difference and decides to share that hope through writing this book.
It's a hopeful way to end.
Yeah, it is.
It reflects his belief in the possibility of making things better, even when you're surrounded by cynicism and obstacles.
Yeah.
It's inspiring. It makes you think that you can be a part of change.
It really does. And for Obama, that hope comes from his faith in the American people.
Right. And their ability to come together to build a better future.
Yeah, he sees that as the unfinished work of our democracy.
The continuous effort to make a more fair and just society. So what stands out to you most from this look into Obama's early thinking?
I think it's amazing how many of the themes he talked about are still relevant today. Political polarization, economic inequality, the role of faith in public life, and how hard it is to find common ground. It's like we're still dealing with those same fundamental questions.
I agree completely. But I think the most inspiring part is that even with all of those challenges, Obama's story gives us hope. It shows us that even when you're faced with negativity and division, it's still possible to believe in a better future and work toward it.
That's a powerful message for everybody.
It is.
No matter what your political views are, it reminds us that we all have the power to make a difference.
To contribute to a more just and caring world.
Exactly.
So as you continue to be involved in politics and public life, remember what Obama says about empathy, dialogue, and understanding. Think about how you can help build a more hopeful and unified America. That's the real legacy of the Audacity of Hope.
I like that.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We'll see you next time.
Yeah, and it's interesting to consider how all of this led him to run for president, even though he knew it would be really complicated and full of compromises.
That's where the title comes in, right? The Audacity of Hope. It's about believing in a better future and being brave enough to go after it, even when it seems impossible, like refusing to be cynical.
Yeah, it's about believing in our country and the power of people to make a difference.
Yeah, and he talks about the unfinished business of our democracy.
Right.
It's like we're constantly working toward a more just and fair society, even when progress seems slow.
Yeah, and it makes you think about how you can be a part of that.
It does.
How to make things better and live up to the ideals of America.
It's a challenge, and it's inspiring. It makes me feel hopeful about the future, even with all the problems we have.
Yeah. Obama's journey really shows us this push and pull between idealism and pragmatism in American politics. When you think about the things we're dealing with today, it's important to remember empathy and being willing to listen to different viewpoints. It's how we bridge the divides that are tearing us apart.
That's a powerful thought to end on. The Audacity of Hope reminds us that politics can be a good thing, a way to create a more just world. But it takes courage and empathy and a commitment to understanding each other.
It reminds us that we're all in this together.
That we can all shape the future of our nation. So as you go about your day, think about Obama's message. How can you show empathy? How can you find common ground? How can you contribute to a more hopeful and unified America? That's what the Audacity of Hope is all about. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We'll see you next time.